It's about truth. It's going to be hardcore. It is a prophetic message, not about any person or people. We love all people. It's about what you are actually dealing with in the world, in your life, what's happening before us in the culture. I believe you are a people who want to know the signs of the times. And so this will be a prophetic revelation, and Pastor John asked if I could share this because he wants you to be aware of everything. And if you're going to hear from God, you have to put away any preconception, open yourself up to receive, and that is here to tell you this, a note here. The Bible says that we are all sinners, and yet we who are saved are children of God. We got to remember that. Stay humble, but also we need to also move in the power of God. And I want to open up with this, Ephesians 5. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For we war not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places. We war not against flesh and blood, but rulers, principalities. Hard for us to visualize such things because it speaks of spiritual forces of evil, as in demonic forces. But in ancient times, it was easier. Deuteronomy 32:16 says, they stirred him up to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations, they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons, which are not God, gods they had known, gods that had recently appeared, gods your ancestors did not fear. You deserted, you went away from the rock. You forgot the Lord. Now note what it's saying. They sacrificed to gods, but it says they were demons that they sacrificed to. What is it saying? The false gods aren't just false gods. They represented principalities. Now listen to Psalm 106. They served their idols, which became a snare to them. They sacrificed their sons and daughters to the demons. They poured out innocent blood. So they served idols, but saying the idols were really stand-ins for the principalities. Now the word of Paul, 1 Corinthians 10, what the pagans sacrifice, they offer to demons and not God. Paul's saying the same thing. These false gods were actually stand-ins for the principalities. Now something else. Book of Revelation, chapter 2, verse 12. To the angel of the church in Pergamon write, these are the words of him who has the sharp double-edged sword. I know where you live, where Satan has his throne. Yet you remain true to my name. You did not renounce the faith in me, not even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was put to death in your city where Satan dwells. What's it speaking of? The throne of Satan. And it locates it in an ancient city called Pergamon. Pergamon was most famous. It didn't have an altar or a throne of Satan. It had a colossal altar of a god, and the god was the god Zeus, king of the gods of the Greco-Roman world. And yet here it says it's where Satan dwells, but it was Zeus to them. In other words, behind the gods of the ancient world were these principalities. What is the opposite of the realm of God? It's the realm of the enemy. God is the object of worship. What's the object of false worship? The enemy. The Bible calls them false gods. Who is the father of falsehood? The enemy. He's called the God of this world. When I was first called to go to India, a land of countless gods and goddesses, deities, all hell broke loose. The moment I said yes, all hell broke loose. Over the ministry, everything went crazy from the moment I said I would go there. And from the moment I said yes to the end of the journey, we had never seen the hand of the enemy and God so strong as we did there. We were going to a land of gods, but we saw the hand of the enemy. There was confusion. The tickets to the mission, they all disappeared. I went to the airport with no tickets. I'm on the plane heading to India. I look out the window and I see pieces of the engine flying off. They had to go back and make an emergency landing. I remember during the journey literally seeing a giant image of the enemy sticking his tongue out at us. Soon after landing in India, we go to a certain site. On the way back, a fog descended on the land, and throughout the road, we see turned over carts and trucks and cars because of the fog, literally turned over. And the taxi that we're in isn't slowing down. Finally, it crashes into a truck with us in it. And
what's the most major threat on the world stage?
Russia. North Korea?
Venezuela is the single greatest resource of oil on the planet. So, why is this country in the midst of one of the greatest humanitarian crises in history?
Your concern is that the Russians are secretly selling weapons to Venezuela?
It would fit a pattern.
Presidente Reyes los ha traicionado a todos.
What happened?
Reyes, look at me. Was his name ever mentioned?
I'm sending you back to D.C.
I'm not going. We do this together. I can live with that.
And we are dragged on the road. By a miracle, we didn't get killed, but we almost did. Later on, I'm reading about that area where that road was in the fog, and it turns out in Hindu mythology, the area is identified as the place of the god Krishna. And Krishna in the myth was known for overturning vehicles. So we saw throughout the way, and our vehicles literally almost overturned. It wasn't the work of a god, it's the work of a principality. I was called to go to Cuba, with that island being under communist reign, to proclaim the gospel. I brought my shofar with me, and I sounded it proclaiming the power of God, and that is represented by the Jubilee. And actually, and I'll say something, this is not in the notes, but just what God did. I brought it in, and they said, you know, don't just sound this. You know, you'll get arrested if you have any kind of gathering anywhere except if it's approved. So we go into a store, the shofar's in the van. I come out, there's a crowd around the van. And we said, what's going on? A whole crowd. They said, we saw the shofar, we saw that thing. It says, you have to blow it. I said, oh, I don't know if I can blow it. He said, you got to blow it. I said, I don't know. So I blow it. And a guy starts shouting and jumping up and down. And we said, what happened? He said, that man is deaf, but he heard the sound of the shofar. Well, I get to Cuba, and a man comes up to me, and he says, we, the believers of Cuba, have been praying for our nation. And the Spirit revealed to us there's a curse on the island. And he said, a Jewish person or Jewish people have to come to break the curse, to begin the breaking of the curse. And he shows us, points to a mountain. He says, that mountain up there over the city, it's a cursed mountain. There's voodoo, there's witchcraft on the mountain. They sacrifice to gods, they worship the gods. But we were told the curse will break and blessing will come down the mountain. I said, all right, Lord, I guess you have a new ministry for me, going up to cursed mountains. So I go up the mountain the next day with a shofar. We get to the top, there's a pavilion. There's a man standing in front of the pavilion in which are the idols of Cuba. He sees me across the mountaintop, and he says, Hola, Jonathan. And I don't know Spanish, but it kind of sounds like, hello, Jonathan. And again, he says it again, and he comes over to me, and I have a translator with me, and he says, I've been waiting for you. It turns out he's a believer. He said, God told me to come up the mountain and wait, and you're going to come. He's holding in his hand a ceramic plate, and there's it's a painting on the ceramic plate. I look at it, it's a painting of me. And I have a prayer shawl, and I have a shofar, just what I had in my hand. And he says, the Lord told me to paint this painting and hang it up in the pavilion of the gods. And that night, though, something happened. That new leather strap just suddenly broke apart. And the plate came down and struck the head of the idol. The idol of the chief god of Cuba, whose name was Ochun. That next morning, the worshipers of the gods opened the house. They found their chief god on the floor. And there's a crown that was removed from her head, representing her authority. And next to her is a plate with a picture of this Jewish guy with a trumpet, a shofar. And the plate was chipped just where the sound came out of the shofar. That's where it struck the head of the idol. We war not against flesh and blood, but against principalities. You know, people say, you read the Bible and say, oh, these are stories. You remember the story of Dagon when they went to the temple of Dagon and the ark and the idol fell on the ground? Well, these aren't stories. The God of Israel is very much alive and well. After this, I go to Brazil to share the word, and there's a lake, and floating on the lake on these platforms are giant statues of gods. The same gods that were on the mountain of Cuba, one of them being Ochun, the god who was struck down. And right after that, 1 month later, I'm called to go to Nigeria. And when I go to Nigeria, they prepare on the stage, or in the back of the stage, they put up a giant painting. And I don't know where they got it, but it's a picture of me blowing the shofar. It's the same picture on the plate. And because I knew this was a land of gods, I was led to share. I said, let me share that story with them. God striking down the gods. And it turned out, I mentioned Ochun, and when I said that, they all reacted. I said, what happened there? They said, don't you know? I said, the name of this state, the whole state is Ochun. It's named after that god. And so I said, really, what's it? They said, the central shrine of the god is here. That people come from all over the world to worship that god. I said, oh, okay, Lord, I guess I have to go there. So we go there. We find the high priestess of Ochun. And she's wearing a white robe, and and at the very end, she's following us around, and we're praying for the people who worship these gods, and she follows us. So I said, last minute, I go up to her. We have a translator, and I start sharing the gospel with her. And at the end, I just take a risk. I said, do you want to receive Jesus? And she says, yes. This is the high priestess of Ochun. And she had been dedicated to the gods from the beginning, so I pray, and I make it a real long prayer. I said, Lord, I renounce this, and I look up at the end, and she's glowing, literally. And her attendants prayed as well. And I said, now you don't need this anymore. You've got the word of God. I show her, Bob, you have the oracles of God. He will speak to you. I just open it up. It just opened up to the scripture, the people who dwell in darkness have seen a great light. We war not against flesh and blood. What the pagans were worshiping were demonic. We live in a civilization that has been swept of those gods by the gospel, but the principalities behind those gods are still here. In some ways, it makes them more dangerous because the effect is not recognized. You have the phenomenon of the Third Reich, Hitler, a nation that had known the gospel, turned away, and what happened? The demonic realm entered in, an entire nation possessed by the enemy. When they turned away from God, that is what happened. And you cannot explain that. You cannot explain any of it without recognizing this is a satanic, demonic thing. You know how the Nazi Party began? It was started by an organization that was called the Thule Society. And you know what they were? They were an occult organization. They started that party. When the Puritan John Winthrop came to America, he wrote a sermon crystallizing the vision of the new civilization that was to be America. It was a sermon that we get from that, the words, we shall be as a city on a hill. That's where we got it from. That's where he took it from the words of Jesus. The first symbol of America was the city on a hill. He spoke of America as following the pattern of Israel. He said, if we follow the God of Israel, then we will know the blessings of Israel. We'll become the most prosperous, the most powerful civilization on earth, and it all came true. America would become the most powerful, the most blessed nation. But what most people don't know is that those very words about the city of the hill were followed right after with a prophetic warning. He said, but, if our hearts shall turn away, that we will not obey, or if we shall be seduced and worship other gods, our pleasures and our profits, and serve them, it is propounded this day we shall perish. Now, very few people in the Western world at that time, even when he wrote it, were worshiping other gods. And he's speaking about America, but he's speaking about worshiping other gods, and he identified them as our lusts and our greed. He used the template of Israel to speak about America. He said America's going to be like a new Israel, and it'll be blessed, but if it turns away, then after the same pattern, it will fall away after the same pattern as Israel. And then the judgments that came on Israel will come. Well, that is what the Harbinger is revealing, for those who don't know it, revealing that the same judgments and signs that came on Israel have now appeared in America. So also the paradigm is saying that the leaders, everything that's happening, we're following the pattern. So then if Israel fell away from God, it turned to the gods. And if we are following that pattern in the wrong way, then we would also be in danger of welcoming the gods to this land. What were their gods? What were their gods in the fall of Israel? There was one above them all. His name was Baal, or we know him as Baal. The god of the Canaanites. Baal was the god of thunder, the god of the clouds, the god of fertility, the god of increase, of gain, of greed, of carnality, of materialism. He was the substitute God, the God that the Israelites turn to when they turn away from God. The alternate God, the God of the apostasy, the rejection of God. He's the spirit by which they drove God out of their public squares and out of the lives of their children and out of their culture. By Baal, they drove God out, and ultimately he was the God by which they persecuted the people of God who stayed true to the ways of God. And when they turned to Baal, they turned to materialism and carnality and impurity. Now we have America, formed after the pattern, dedicated of ancient Israel, founded on the word of God as was Israel. So that if America departs from God, it will open itself up to the same principalities. And the first principality is the principality of Baal, the god of the turning away, the god of the substance by which a nation is seduced. At the height of America's prosperity and power, mid-20th century, America began turning away from its foundation, step by step, going to idols, materialism, carnality, ungodliness. Under the spirit of Baal, we began driving God out of our public squares, God out of the lives of our children, out of the culture to this day. But there was a second principality that was in the fall of Israel. Baal had a consort, a female goddess. Her name was Ashtoreth, also called Astarte, also called Ishtar. She was the goddess or principality of lust, of sexual immorality. Her priestesses were prostitutes, the so-called sacred prostitutes of Canaanite religion, who performed sexual acts as sacred rites. So in the life of the time of Baal, after Baal comes Ashtoreth. Sexuality is taken out of the bedroom, out of the sacred bond of marriage. It's put on public display. It becomes part of public popular culture. The culture becomes sexualized. This principality divorces sexuality from marriage. And so it takes possession of ancient Israel. The culture becomes impure. The principality of lust is all over, proliferating with images, with idols of naked women. What about America? First came Baal, but after Baal comes Ashtoreth. So as America, notice how it happened. As America first turns away from the God of its foundation to the principality of Baal, then it finds itself dealing with the principality of Ashtoreth. No accident. The same decade, 1960s, that saw the beginning of America taking God out, saw also the so-called sexual revolution. America is given over then to the spirit of Ashtoreth, the spirit of sexual immorality. Sexuality is taken out of the private realm, out of the marriage covenant, becomes part of popular culture, public culture. The principality takes possession of America. The culture becomes sexualized, proliferating images of carnality. The worship of Baal and Ashtoreth involved sacred prostitutes. The word in Greek for prostitute is porn, porne, from which we get pornography. So now the images of pornography now proliferate across America in the worship of Ashtoreth, sexuality taken out of the bonds of marriage and now put on public display. So America becomes sexualized, given to immorality. But there's one more of this unholy trinity. The fall of ancient Israel didn't end with Ashtoreth and a sexual revolution. There was a third god, a third principality of the dark trinity. And that third was foreshadowed by the first two. The worship of Baal was connected to it. The worship of Ashtoreth was connected to it, because she wasn't only the goddess of sexual immorality, she was also a goddess of destruction. She had a sword. And there's a hint there that the fruit of sexual immorality is always destruction. And so through this, quote, sexual revolution came the weakening of marriage. the weakening of family, the destruction of marriages, and all the other destructions that come, broken marriages, broken children, broken homes, broken lives, broken hearts. But it went further. It went to the last of the three principalities. There was Baal, there was Ashtoreth, and then there was Molech. Molech was known especially as the god to whom the Israelites offered up their children as sacrifices. Why would anybody do that? For prosperity, they believed if they did that, the God would grant them increase. So their worship, the children of the parents would actually offer up their children. They would approach the idol, the bronze idol with the head of a bull. Seated with outstretched arms, over a fire, they would lay their infant. And then they would release the infant into the fire. And so the Bible says, God says, you caused your children to pass through the fire, therefore judgment is coming. Under the influence of Baal, under that, you see, that's what happens in the end. America now, under the principality of Baal, then Ashtoreth, sexual immorality, it then leads to the destruction that we have witnessed in our lives of the marriages, families in America. And then 10 years after America removed God from the public square, from the schools, 1973, the nation legalizes the killing of children in abortion. Under the principality now, it's of Molech. They offered up their own children. You see, when a culture removes God, it's removing the image of God. And once the image of God is removed, then anything goes. Whether it's the reign of Nazism or communism, whatever it is, it doesn't matter, or America in the West, or it doesn't matter. When you remove God, you're removing the sacredness of life. In ancient times, the children would be burned with fire. In modern times, burned with chemicals, dismembered, same thing. Those who oversee the killing of unborn children, who profit off of it, are the modern day priests of Moloch. And these are actual quotes of those who have done it. These are these people. Listen to what they say. They say abortion, quote, is a sacrament in the hands of women. Another one says it's not immoral to choose abortion, it's simply another kind of morality, a pagan one. 2,000 years ago, the gospel came into pagan culture, a culture of gods and goddesses, and the killing of infants, the killing of children. By the way, if you have any issue with the connection here, you know that Israel offered up thousands of its children. We have offered up 60 million of our children. But the gospel came into that culture, and the gods and goddesses began to disappear. So did abortion. So did the killing of children. But so it was linked, as the gospel came, it was linked to the ending of abortion. So what happens if America, Western civilization, turns away from God? It will begin to turn back to the ways of the gods, the ways of the pagan world. The killing of children will again be a sign. And when did abortion return to the West? At the very same moment when America began to depart from God. And that is true all across the world. Do you know what the first nation was to legalize abortion? The first culture, it was the first culture to depart from the gospel. It was the Soviet Union. So if the disappearance of abortion was linked to the disappearance of the gods and pagan morality, then the reappearance is linked to the return of the gods. Messiah spoke of a man who's possessed by a spirit. He's delivered, he's cleaned up, but then it says the spirit returns now with 7 spirits, and the man's end is worse than the beginning. Now, what many people don't realize is he's not talking about a person, even though you can apply that. He's talking about a generation, a culture, a civilization. And when you take that, apply it to now Western civilization, it opens up a revelation. See, Western culture was a man who was possessed as a pagan civilization by the gods and demons and spirits. Then came the gospel to cast them out. The principalities were subdued, but it was cleansed of killing children, it was cleansed of immorality, cleansed of much darkness. But what happens if after being cleansed, it turns back? Then it means it will be repossessed, and it will be many times worse than before. And that explains why what we're witnessing right now. Between a pre-Christian pagan morality and a post-Christian civilization, it's the post-Christian that is far more dangerous. A pre-Christian culture can produce a Nero or a Caligula, but a post-Christian culture produces Hitler. So we are witnessing the return of these things. So that's why we're seeing things that even the pagans didn't do. The principalities are back in fullness. That means the gods come back and it's worse. And here, not necessarily with statues, but the culture that will walk in the spirit and not even know it's in the spirit of these things subject to the demonic. So we are seeing things unprecedented. Now let me show you something else I found when I read the ancient records concerning one of these principalities, Ashtoreth, that you need to hear. The goddess of sexual immorality, Ashtoreth, had another side to her. She was the principality that represented, listen, the merging of male and female. Her work was to confuse gender. Her work was to break down the distinctions between man and woman. So what is it that happened in America? It begins turning away, becomes carnal, then turns to sexual immorality, and then the children, and then comes this merging, this confusion. This is the goddess Ashtoreth. It wars against the creation of God. I saw in the ancient texts of this a quote concerning the principality. She says, though I am a woman, I am a man. The priests of Ashtoreth were men who crossed the boundaries of gender to appear as women. It's recorded they would dress with one side of them being male and the other being female. The principality of Ashtoreth causes a civilization to lose the distinction of man and woman, to become confused, to become seduced against even human nature, and a war against it. And this principality, even in ancient times, brought the manifestation of all these things, these transvestism, transsexuality, confusion, destruction of role, destruction of gender. Not only divorcing sexuality from marriage, but now divorcing it from gender and human nature. To all the things we have seen in the culture of bisexuality, homosexuality, transsexuality, pansexuality, as in the days of the ancient God, they were all there. It is a war not only against sexual morality, it's a war of being. Ashtoreth is the principality that feminizes men and masculinizes women. So that is what the culture is doing, and they have no idea why they're doing it. But you do. This principality is charged, according to the ancient records, it says to turn a man into a woman into a man, change one into the other, make young women dress as young men, on the right side, make young men dress as young women, and change it all. These three, the dark trinity, Baal, Ashtoreth, and Molech, they work together. And they work together to this day in America. For those of you who have read the paradigm, or those who don't, you know the ancient mystery we are now replaying. That our leaders are following the templates of ancient leaders. Every one of our leaders is following an ancient leader, the pattern of an ancient leader in the Bible, so much so that it actually determines their very time, the exact number of years each of them will have on the national stage, each one. I'm not going through it, it's just a mention. Bill Clinton will follow that of Ahab without realizing it. And he will be on the national stage from 1979 to 2001, and that is 22 years of Bill Clinton. It says in the Bible, Ahab reigned for 22 years. Barack Obama follows in one of the heirs of Ahab, and his name is Joram. And Joram, it says, Barack Obama came on the stage at the Democratic Convention 2004, lasts to the end of his presidency, 2016, comes out to 12 years of Barack Obama. It says in the Bible, Joram reigned for a period of 12 years. And then there was Jezebel, and this is not about the person. We need to pray for the person. She doesn't know what she's doing. But Hillary Clinton, of course, is the wife of Bill Clinton. You didn't know that. And so she follows this, and what it was about Jezebel, not about the birth, but the sign, Jezebel, she worshiped female power. She championed the goddess Ashtoreth and Baal, which ultimately meant the sacrifice of children. Hillary Clinton has become the champion of abortion in America. Planned Parenthood voted her the champion of the century of abortion. Not that she knows it. But so you have all these things happening, and everything follows an exact template. And so Hillary Clinton was on the national stage for 22 years with her husband. On her own, she was in power. She was in Washington on her own. Senator for 12 years, for 8 years, then Secretary of State, 12 years altogether. And then she took 2 years out of the public life, came back for 2 years to run for president, comes out to 14 years on her own. 22 years with her husband, 14 years on her own. You look at the Bible, Jezebel was on the stage for 22 years with her husband on her own, 14 years. But those ancient, it's not about the people, we pray for the people, but the ancient leaders were linked to principalities, gods. The ancient queen, Jezebel, she actually invited the priests of the gods and goddesses to the palace. Well, actually, this actually happened in the Clinton years. They actually invited people who are of the New Age called priestesses and to the White House, and actually the First Lady had sessions with one of them who advocated goddess worship. And this woman even spoke about the land of Jezebel in her book, and even spoke about the goddess Ashtoreth. And they actually had sessions where they were channeling these things, these spirits. But what happens in the paradigm is that the nation comes to a showdown between the former First Lady and a new man who comes on the stage. And this new man, he rises up out of nowhere. In the Bible, he is Jehu. Jehu will be the mystery behind Donald Trump for America. Jehu was not a politician, he was a fighter. Donald Trump's not a politician, and he fights with everybody. Jehu did not originally follow God, yet God still used him and raised him up for the purposes of God. So Donald Trump did not follow God, did not live a godly life, yet God can use whomever he pleases to use. And he raises up this Jehu back then in the paradigm to rise up to become the next king of Israel and to fight against the house of Ahab. And ultimately in the end, it comes to a showdown between Jehu and Jezebel. It comes between, in other words, the warrior and the former First Lady. It's exactly what happened in America. And though everybody was saying that the Democrats are going to trounce Trump, the paradigm said that Jehu will emerge victorious. When Jehu rose to power, he saw the temple of Baal in the Capitol, where they were offering up children. See, Jehu was originally for Baal. He was on the side of Ahab and Jezebel. Then he turned and he said, no, this is wrong. And now he's opposing Baal. So Donald Trump, now who was once for, he is now for life. And so he saw the temple of Baal, Jehu, and he destroyed it. See, when the warrior rises, the temple of Baal comes crashing down. But it turns out, so when Donald Trump actually came to the White House, his first act as president was to undo the policies that were for the killing of children in the past presidential orders. He reversed it. And he's been seeking to it. So you got to pray. But it turns out there's actually is a temple of Baal that has stood for 2,000 years in the Middle East. In the 2,000 years. The modern Jehu, Donald Trump, began his rise in the summer of 2015. He announced his candidacy. 2 months later, the 2,000-year-old temple of Baal comes crashing down to the earth. Now, no person could have orchestrated that. But we war not against flesh and blood. We war against the principalities. The signs have appeared in the land. The harbingers have not stopped coming in the land, nor has the war of the gods. In the last days of the presidential campaign, when the issue of killing unborn children, if you remember, was front and center, a sign appears in New York City. I went down there to actually witness this. A sign appears, another harbinger in New York City. It was the actual sign of the god Baal. It was the ancient arch of Baal. They erected it in New York City. The arch through which the worshipers of Baal would go to offer up their children. It appears in New York. And I witnessed that they had this great unveiling. They played Middle Eastern music as the kind that would be played when Baal was worshipped. And as those of you who know the harbingers, when one of these things appears, there's almost always a leader in America who says something about defiance. And so there was the deputy mayor of New York was there to celebrate the Arch of Baal. And says, we are here doing this as an act of defiance. Here, now, as I saw this, I just prayed for America. Because this is a sign of a nation that has once known God but has turned away. The sign of Baal, the sign of a nation that had fallen into sexual immorality, the sign of a nation that has lifted up its children. All there. And I was just led to see something. And what we did is we took where the Arch of Baal, where they put it in New York City, and where it stood in the Middle East in relation to the Temple of Baal, and we overlaid and said, okay, so what is this now pointing to? Where would the Temple of Baal be if we overlaid it in New York City? It ended up pointing us to the ground known as Ground Zero. Ground Zero, where also one of the 9 harbingers is standing, that tower of defiance. New York. It was New York that led the nation in the killing of the unborn and remains the capital of abortion. Just a few months ago, about 3 months ago, 2 days before my son was born, New York again led the nation in darkness. It passed the horrific law that legalized the killing of children up to the time of birth. And they celebrated it. And the governor who called for this to be passed was standing next to Hillary Clinton at his side. He ordered that the tower of Ground Zero, one of the 9 harbingers, to be lit up in celebration of this horrific law. And so they lit it up in New York in the color pink. The war of the gods continue. Like it or not, you're in the war. Because it ultimately is warring to stop your witness. As a believer, it is this very thing and these very principalities that threaten your religious freedom and the gospel. And this gives us a revelation. Because when the gods were making inroads into Israel, it first was subtle. And the appeal was, hey, be tolerant, be open-minded, do your own thing, live and let live. But once the gods come to power, once they prevail, once they begin to predominate, once they are celebrated and established, it is then that everything changes. They wield the sword against anyone who holds true to the Word of God. So in America, the new morality that once came in, it got through the door with calls of tolerance, once prevailing, seeks to destroy every trace of the gospel. That is why not long ago in California, it came within inches of ending all Christian schools in that state. That is why in one Texas city right now, the government is telling churches that they must hire in the ministry people who live lives opposed to the gospel. That is why in New Jersey, where we are centered, just became the 2nd state to force children to be indoctrinated into a curriculum that calls evil good and good evil. That is why the vice president's wife was crucified in the press. Why? Because she simply worked in a Christian school that believed the Bible. That is why not long ago, California almost passed a law that, according to that law, would have made the sales of Bible illegal in that state. That is why God is routinely mocked. That's why Chick-fil-A has been banned from airports. Why? Because they gave donations to the Salvation Army that believes the Bible. That is why God is the object of mockery on television. That's why believers are increasingly marginalized, vilified. The principalities want total domination. They want every knee to bow to Baal. When these 3 things, these 3 gods prevailed, they went against every believer. And so they are right now seeking to deal a blow against every congregation that holds true to God, every believer who holds true to God. You see, it wasn't even, by the way, if you remember last September, there was another rage, fury in the culture over not Trump, but over the Supreme Court nominee. They went crazy. It wasn't about the man, it wasn't about the woman. It was about the issues of life and the issues of morality. It was about the gods. And what the day before they started the main hearing on Capitol Hill, in the Capitol building, outside that building on the Washington Mall, something appears out of nowhere. It is the Arch of Baal on the Capitol Hill. A sign of what is really going on. And what the paradigm reveals, and what all these things reveal, is we have a window of time. We have a window of time to spread the word of God, to uphold the ways of God, and to pray for the revival from God. All the more as never before. We got to take this even more seriously, more diligently. We must pray for revival. We must work for revival. We must believe for revival. And we must also live in revival. Because if you live in revival, the revival starts here and now, and the devil can't do anything about it. And I know you are a people who cry out for revival. Well, now is the time, because if America doesn't see revival, it's over. It is the only thing needed. It is what is needed. And if these are the days of Baal and Ashtaroth and Molech, then these must also be the days of Elijah. But who is Elijah? Where is Elijah? You are Elijah. You are called to be an Elijah now. You see, in the days when righteousness is upheld in the culture, no culture is perfect, but many of us grew up in America that actually upheld biblical values. Those days, that's the King David paradigm. But we're not in that anymore. We're in the days when unrighteousness is lifted up. That means we're not in the King David paradigm. We are now in the Elijah paradigm. Elijah would not bow his knee to Baal. Elijah didn't run from the spirit of Baal. Elijah didn't hide from the spirit of Baal. He didn't withdraw. He engaged it. He challenged it. He confronted it. He took it head on. He took it to the top of Mount Carmel. He showed it no fear. He showed it no reverence. He did not retreat. He did not live defensively. He lived offensively because he knew he was on the winning side with God. He took the ground. You, man of God, and you, woman of God, must also live in the spirit and the power of Elijah. It means whatever is still in your life that is not of God, you got to rule it out once and for all. Whatever foothold, whatever it is of that, because whenever you give in, you're like bowing your knee to Baal. Have nothing to do with immorality, have nothing to do with carnality, have nothing to do with worldliness, have nothing to do with Baal. It means that whatever is there, you got to rule it. Don't say tomorrow, do it today. Take the step today. Take the first step today. And if there's something that's not in your life that God has called to for you to rise to in your life, and once and for all be that victorious child of God, man of God, woman of God, the time is now, today, not tomorrow. Take the first step. Don't delay it. Don't delay it. You see, let me say this as we bring this home now to you. I got saved because I was hit by a locomotive train. And the reason why, what happened was, see, I said to God, because I knew he was true, but I didn't want to follow him, because I thought if I follow him, I have to become a monk and join a monastery. So I said, God, let me make a deal with you. Give me a long life, and I'll accept you on my deathbed. So right after that, I almost got killed. And in this second, it was actually twice. Second time, I'm heading to a train track in a Ford Pinto, which if you remember, they blew up. You touch them, they blow up. So now I'm in a Ford Pinto. It's night. I'm heading to a train track. There's no protection. You couldn't see. People had been struck on that train track. And I look and I see the cars. It's wintertime. You couldn't see where the train track was on an angle. It was a bumpy road. It was just metal rails. And I look and the cars are crossing from the other side. I said, well, but the light's going on. I said, well, maybe the light's broken or maybe the train already passed. Let me check. So I drive up. I look. I see to my left. I see a light. It's the train. It's coming head on. I'm on the track. I don't know it. I said, you know what, maybe I'm a little too close. So let me, just to be safe, let me try to back up a little. I look in my rearview mirror, but now there's headlights right in back of me. I said, okay, well, maybe I'll back up. So I back up a foot. But I thought of just being safe. So I'm waiting for the train. I'm still in the path of the train. The train comes and plows into the car. The car goes up like aluminum foil, and all I could do was call out to God. So I called out to God, and the car is destroyed. I didn't get a scratch on me. So I get out and I said, God, can we renegotiate that deal? I'll accept you. I'll accept you. I'll follow you. When I turn 20, just don't kill me until then. And so on my 20th birthday, because I made the deal and I gave my word, so on my 20th birthday, I didn't know how to get saved. But I remember from Hebrew school that God met Moses on a mountain. He met Elijah on a mountain. I said, let me find a mountain. So I found a mountain at night. I go up to the top of the mountain. I find the top of it. I kneel down on the rock and I give my life to the Lord. That's how I came to the Lord, because of a train. You know, it says Jews need signs. I needed a train. That's what I needed. So the thing was, but here's the thing. There was a mystery to that mountain. Even then, I had no idea until years later. Years later, I returned to the mountain of my salvation. At night, I brought up a talit, the prayer shawl. I brought up a shofar, brought up a Bible and a flashlight. Go up all night. I found the rock that I gave my life to. I have a great time with God, and I blow the shofar. I have a great time praying and thanking God for everything he did. And next day, I go to the service. I preach. It's Sunday morning. And there's a woman waiting at the end of the line. She says, I'm waiting. She says, I knew it was your birthday, because it was my birthday when I came to the Lord. She said, I knew it was your birthday. I have a present for you. And she shows me a big, gigantic framed picture that she bought in the store, and it's got a drawing on it. I look at the drawing. I'm staring at it. It's a drawing of a man standing on top of a mountain with a prayer shawl blowing a shofar. I said, that's weird. That was me last night. She said, really? She said, what were you doing? I said, well, I went back to the mountain where I came to the Lord. She said, really, where is it? What mountain? I said, I don't know the name of the mountain. I just know where it is. She said, well, tell me where it is. She says, I know the mountain. I said, really? She said, yeah, I happen to live at the bottom of it. I said, really? She said, do you know what that mountain is? I said, no. She said, that mountain's dedicated to Satan. I said, really? I got saved on the top of it. She said, on the top of it, that's where they gather. I said, really? Well, I just found this rock. I said, that's the altar. And then it hit me. Because there was a mystery that made no sense. On the mountain were words, and it said, made no sense to me. It said, no Jew shall enter these sacred grounds. And I said, who on earth would write that? Nazis on the mountain, Ku Klux Klan? Who would write that? Satan would write that. His people would write that. Why? Because for 2,000 years he's been trying to stop the Jewish people from coming back to their sacred mountain, to Messiah. I said, too late, Satan. This Jew is back with a Messiah. Too late. But the Lord showed me something. He says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. The Lord, I'm sure the enemy was trying to kill me with that train, but God was saving me with that train. But it showed me something right away. See, many of you came to the Lord in a nice sanctuary like this. I come on a satanic mountaintop. You came and they blessed you and they gave you a thing. Said, God has a wonderful plan for your life. Read this. I get no Jew shall enter these sacred grounds. But the Lord showed me something that from the beginning, listen, you cannot avoid the fight. Don't try. Don't be afraid of the fight. Don't run from the fight. You are on the winning side. Embrace the fight. Take your ground. Take your place. Go up your mountain. Take the place. Because God has called you for victory, man of God. Take your victory. Take it. Fight, because you're going to win if you fight. Don't give up, and you're going to win. Because everything the enemy tries against you, it's a sign of how much God has for you. You got to fight the fight, and you're going to win. You're going to win. You get the chance to stand for God in a day when the world's against God. That is an honor. That's a high, powerful honor. And more powerful than 1,000 Christians who are lukewarm is the one Christian who will stand for God all out in a day of darkness. In the days of Baal, you have the honor of standing like Elijah. And that's the one who's going to do great and mighty things. Because the spirit of Baal is nothing compared to the spirit of our God. The spirit of the devil is nothing compared to the spirit of God. The spirit of lust is nothing compared to the power of God. The spirit of bondage is nothing compared to the freedom of God. The spirit of fear is nothing compared to the spirit of the living God. And all of you who have been praying, Lord, I wish I could live in biblical times. Congratulations, you are there. You are there. These are the days of Elijah. These are the days of the prophets. These are the days of the apostles. And the eyes of the Lord are searching the entire earth, looking for you, who will be that one who will give wholeheartedly for the Lord, and he will lift you up. Child of God, as we bring this home, child of God, these principalities have warred against you. Baal, the god of idolatry. Ashtoreth, the goddess of lust and sexual immorality. Moloch, the god of destruction. For some of you, it's been the spirit of lust, warred against you to stop your calling. Some of you, it's been the spirit of bitterness to stop your calling. Unforgiveness to stop you. Some, it's been the spirit of fear, spirit of hopelessness, despair. Some of you, the spirit of addiction, spirit of self-centeredness, spirit of abuse, victimhood, spirit of rejection, spirit of unworthiness, spirit of defilement, spirit of guilt and shame, uncleanness and bondage. The spirit has warred against you. It's tried to distract you, wound you, abuse you, hinder you, cripple you, paralyze you, shame you, stop you from ever becoming what God has called you to become. And too many times you believed it, gave room for it, yielded to it, followed it, been in bondage, bowed your knee. But from this time forth, you are to rise up in the spirit and the power of Elijah and say, I will not bow down my knee to Baal. I will not bow my knee to Molech. I will not bow down my knee to the spirit of lust. I will not bow down my knee to the spirit of fear. I will not bow down my knee to the spirit of rejection or the spirit of bitterness or addiction. I will not bow down anymore to the spirit of victimhood. I will not bow down to that. You are to rise up, for I will only bow down my knee to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the only name that is above every name, the name of Yeshua, Jesus the Messiah. I am free. I am victorious. I can do all things through Messiah who strengthens me. For greater is he who is in me than he who is in the world. In the power of the glory of the name above all names, fight the gods. Fight the good fight. Fight the darkness. You can do all things, and you will overcome in the power of the Almighty. The name of Yeshua, light of the world, the glory of Israel, the King of all kings, and the Lord of all lords, and the Lion of the tribe of Judah.